Good evening. Our next speaker, Dr. Stephen Greer, is the founder of the Disclosure Project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI, and the Orion Project, and recently Sirius Technology Advanced Research. He presided over the groundbreaking National Press Conference Disclosure event in May of 2001. Over 20 military, government, intelligence, and corporate witnesses presented compelling evidence regarding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms visiting this planet and the reverse engineering of the energy and propulsion systems of these craft. Dr. Greer is a lifetime member of Alpha Omega Alpha, the nation's most prestigious medical honor society. Dr. Greer has now retired as an emergency physician to work with CSETI, the Disclosure Project, and the Orion Project. Most recently, Dr. Greer's work was the subject of a new film called Sirius, which premiered on April 22nd of this year. Here to talk about disclosure, newest evidence about the ATACAMA humanoid, Dr. Stephen Greer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Everybody hear me all right? Oh, a big shout out to Jan Harzan. Where's Jan Harzan? Thank you for inviting me here. MUFON's very lucky to have a man of his intelligence and integrity and caliber, and a big applause to Jan Harzan. Many of you know that we have been doing a lot of research on a small 6-inch, 6 to 8 year old person. This. And there's a lot of controversy around it. What I want to cover in the next hour or so is an update on all the scientific research, but I also want to put it in a larger framework. And that is the area of northern Chile has had a very long history of contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, sightings of luminous objects going into the foothills of the Andes in this northern Atacama Desert area. And most intriguingly, and this is thanks to a fantastic researcher, ALEXIS, who has gone down there to the site where this body was excavated and found, is there have been reports of small, foot-high or so humanoids that have been seen coming out during the full moon, or visible during moonlight, but not seen during the day, and apparently they live under the ground. Now, what's interesting about that is that the question becomes, will we find in our genetic analysis that there's some kind of sensitivity to the UV, ultraviolet spectrum, that we have here on Earth? I think we might. I just have notified the genetics team at Stanford University that's doing all the research on this with us of this salient fact to begin to look through the genetic material. And this entire adventure I went on started really about 4 years ago. And I was given a lecture much like this, and a man came up to me, and he had a smartphone, and he hit the button and started playing a video of this creature. And I thought to myself, what the hell is this? And my first take on it, this has got to be a hoax. Can't be, no way. And then he began to share with me some other information about it. So the institute, Ramon Navia, that has this institute in Barcelona, Spain, asked me to come and look at it. Now, there was an exopolitics conference there. Many of you may have been there. And so that was the cover for me going to Barcelona to look at this little creature. And I was told I was only the third or fourth person ever to hold it in my hand. And I put on surgical gloves and was holding, examining. No question, it's an organic, intact, non-hoaxed specimen of some type. So at that point, we thought, well, what are we going to do? They were not comfortable with us taking it. There's all kinds of things swirling to my head. We got to figure this thing out. Well, when we launched the film Sirius, which we're going to show tonight, by the way, at 10 o'clock, for those of you who want to see it. And I do want to do a shout out to all you who contributed to that. It was the largest crowdfunded documentary in the history of Hollywood. And thank you. Number one. And it's due to a lot of you here who contributed. Nobody had the rights to that to keep anything out of it, which is why this got in. CBS would never let this in. Now, as a result of going to Barcelona and examining it, I looked at some initial x-rays, and I said, yep, this is an actual organism. This is not someone put together chicken bones and faked some kind of creature. So at this point, I'm thinking, we've really got to drill down on this, but they weren't comfortable with us doing anything invasive to the specimen. And the main reason they invited me over is because I'm a medical doctor and also the head of the global disclosure movement. So they wanted me to know about this, but they wouldn't let us do anything with it. So fast forward to this September, a few months ago, in 2012, and we approached them again and said, look, we really want to come over there and do the following, because we have a team that we've assembled at Stanford University who wants to do the genome, the genetic research, and also study the morphology with the top experts in the world who study skeletal dysplasias. Now, you're going to get a big biology lesson today. You may not like that, but bear with me. Dysplasias are abnormality of the skeletal form. And usually, those have a genetic phenotype, sort of root. So you have a gene that will give you dwarfism, a gene that will give you Marfan syndrome, very long bones. You know, I'm 6'4", but I don't have Marfan syndrome. Don't worry. I have other things, but I don't have Marfan syndrome. Here's the thing, is that if we can look at this and do a thorough review, we thought maybe we're going to find something extraordinary here. So given this as a gift from Stanford, now remember, the man doing the genetic work is Dr. Gary Nolan. He's the Harris Chair. It's an endowed chair. So he can pretty much do what he wants. The man doing the work on studying and comparing the genetic defects from a skeletal point of view, Dr. Ralph Lockman, is the #1 person in the world on skeletal dysplasias and, in particular, neonatal and in childhood. So he's the #1 person in the world, not at Stanford, but on Earth. They all volunteer to do this without charge in the interest of science and also in the interest of disclosure. So we have a real debt of gratitude to Stanford and these scientists. Now, at that point, we then were able to convince them to go over there. So we fly over, and of course, here we come with our gowns and our masks and our surgical stuff, and we take 2 of the inferior ribs clippings, little pieces, about that big, you know, it's a few millimeters. But inside of each of these clippings was bone marrow. And when we looked at it under the dissecting microscope, we said, eureka. It was done under sterile conditions, put in a sterile container provided by Stanford, and then it was forensically handed off. I just want to give you this background. It was a forensic, completely controlled scientific handoff. Actually, I have a home in Washington near the White House, and Dr. Nolan flew in from California, was having a meeting, I think, with the National Institutes of Health. We met at my place. I personally handed it off to him there. He then took it and began to process it. It was done under the most rigorous conditions, and he ended up consulting with the top experts in the world on what is called ancient DNA. Now, there's some confusion on this. Ancient, we're not talking mummies from the Egyptians thousands of years ago. Ancient DNA is that if you find a body that's been dead for a year or two, that's considered ancient or old DNA. Why? Because that DNA has been around long enough to degrade from living DNA. And there's a whole different set of protocols that you do scientifically to find out the analysis and do it properly. So it has to be handled from the very beginning. I will not bore you with all those details, because you will all just, your eyes will roll back. The fact is, the point I'm trying to make is that Dr. Nolan and his team did this in the most rigorous scientific way possible. Now, this is at the point where he thought it would become fairly easy. Getting the specimen wasn't easy, figuring out the protocols, and then it was run. That's when the trouble started. So I want to go first to this first slide. As you can see from the morphology, and I'm going to get into the genetic material in a minute, you have a very unusual shape here. This is 10 ribs There are no genetic syndromes in humans known in the entire literature with 10 ribs. You have a head that has 4 skull bones instead of 6. You have long bones that are developed that have, and we're going to get into this in a moment, growth plates, epiphyseal plates. It's a good new word for you guys, epiphyseal. But you know when you have growth plates in kids, you can see them. This has a growth plate of a 6 to 8-year-old, but it's 6 inches tall. Think about it for a moment. 6 inches, 13 centimeters. There are so many abnormalities, what we call a global level of abnormalities, that there is no known genetic syndrome in the world that has ever been described that this life form fits, whatever it was. We believe it lived between 100 and 200 years ago, probably late 1800s. This is still being looked at. There's something called a genetic clock where you can actually look at the genetic material and see how long it's degraded. Carbon dating is going to be more difficult because we only took a very tiny amount of the material from these ribs right here. So the eye sockets are totally different. The size of the cranium is amazingly different. From here, look at your neighbor sitting next to you. From their eyebrows to the top of their head, you would end here. This is about 3 times the cranial vault of a Homo sapien, a human, which is very consistent with a lot of other humanoid sightings, just making this point. It also has a very different shaped scapula, and we'll go through some more of these pictures. If you look at the back, I don't know how well they're coming out here, the scapula is very differently shaped, and here's a view of the eye socket and this sort of bossing over the eye, what looks like an eyelid, but it's actually bony material. And this was a hole not made by us. Someone else had done this tragically before we got there. But we did take some meningeal material and some matter out of the skull, and that is in part of the collection that we have. This is the scapula. Very different location and shape. I'm just going to show you these pictures just so you have a sense. Now, this is a pen, a writing pen. This is the entire body. Imagine putting this through a CAT scanner. The radiology place in Barcelona was going, WTF is this? I mean, it's not every day you walk in with one of these. What is this? And the first thing that the chief of this huge medical center, Dr. Manchon, said, as a woman, a physician, radiologist, chief of radiology, said, "Oh my God, it's an alien." I said, well, I'm not going to say that, but you can. So anyway. So this was what we put it on to run it through the CAT scanner. A little dish. And you can see the angle. It does have a fracture on the right humerus upper arm, and it has a fracture on the right posterior, what we would call mastoid cell, this area of the skull. We believe it is either resulted in this creature's death or may have happened right after death. Here are some of the X-ray. I don't know if these spotlights are going to be able to be taken off. I don't know why you'd have a spotlight on a stage on this, but you need to kill this light. I want to show these X-rays. They're very important. Can they dim it? Can you guys, is there another screen you can see it on? Okay. So these X-rays were taken at the request of Dr. Ralph Lockman at Stanford. He wanted specific angles and views so that he could do a determination and comparison with human fetuses, with human embryos, with known human genetic syndromes. And these are the shots that we got. I'm not going to go through all the abnormalities there. TNTC, which is a term in medicine, too numerous to count. There are so many abnormalities versus a human, and to have all the abnormalities found in one creature, one specimen, is very unique. Now, this is where this gets to be critical. When you look at the epiphyseal plates, This is the growth plate that you have in bones. This is a 1-month human. It hasn't even started to form where there would be a normal growth plate. And now look at a 6-year-old human and look at the ATACAMA creature. All right? Now, there's a lot of bad information on the internet about this. It's been written by quack doctors, quack scientists, debunkers, fools, and liars. So I know, I'm blunt, everyone loves it or they hate it, deal with it. So the fact of the matter is, this is dispositive. And what I mean by dispositive, you do not have epiphyseal plates in an embryo. So if you read that this is a 15 to 18-year-old embryo, that is a lie. This is a 6 to 8-year-old child, which is amazing because it's 6 inches big. So I wanted you to understand this very carefully. Now, here's the report by Dr. Lockman. And I think it's very important for you you can read this on your own, but he states point blank that it's in accordance with, it's a 6 to 8-year-old. It has 10 ribs. Humans normally have 12 and rarely 11. He goes through all this stuff, and he signs it. And he signs every page of it, because I said, you know, this is going to be very controversial for you. He said, I don't care. You know, I mean, he's a tenured professor, world expert in the subject, and he says, this is amazing. So he wrote this to Dr. Nolan, and then, of course, I have the original in our archive in our vault. So what is also interesting, if you read this, is that it doesn't fall into any known forms of dwarfism. Now, an extreme form of dwarfism, 6 to 8-year-old, is still not going to be 6 inches. I've delivered a lot of premature babies emergently, what are called precipitous deliveries, when they just come out too quickly, you know, and it's an emergency delivery. But I can tell you, you don't have anything this size that lives. Certainly not 6 or 8 years, ever. Doesn't happen. Cannot, has never happened. So this report is the most important thing that's come about, is Dr. Lockman's assessment and his imprimatur stating that this is a 6 to 8-year-old child. And these are all the things that he found, the abnormalities. He does, of course, mention the obvious relative facial hypoplasia. Now, one thing that he also has said since then that he didn't put in his report is that the epiphyseal findings of the leg are found throughout the entire skeletal system. Dr. Manchon of the clinic, the radiological clinic in Barcelona, when she looked at it, immediately made the same comment, because it was because from the size, you look at it superficially, it's got to be a miscarried fetus. And she says, no. But the bone density, the epiphyseal plates, this is a several-year-old child. But she didn't know exactly. She hadn't done the epiphyseal plate comparisons because she was just seeing them as it came out of the developer. But she immediately said this is absolutely not a fetus, even though it's 6 inches large, which is a 15 to 18-week fetus normally. So here are more of his findings. And what I think that we want to understand from all of this is that, can the CAT scan play? Is that it's not just the skeletal. Oops, sorry. There's a CAT scan that's supposed to play. Oops, no. I apologize. I guess it's not playing. I'm not very techy. What do you do to make a CAT scan play? Well, the CAT scan, they may be able to figure that out. The CAT scan shows internal organs. So it shows the lungs that have collapsed, what looks like a small part left of a heart, what's left of a heart in the rib cage. So that was totally intact. And that's also an amazing finding, because if you were going to just put together something with a bunch of bones and what have you, you're not going to also be able to put together, under CAT scan imagery, proof of internal organs that are still there. And you can go to SeriousDisclosure.com and actually see the CAT scan, all the images on our website. So we'll go to the next one. I want you to listen to this for a moment. Sound, please.
From a clinical standpoint, it's a human mutation, right? One of the things that has to be answered, because just a preliminary examination of this sample is that it is obviously older than just an aborted fetus, right? So a preliminary examination tells you that this is a small human, perhaps, right, that has lived post-birth for a sufficiently long period of time that how do you explain how something 6 inches tall survived to any length of time that would allow for it to survive 100 or 1,000 years ago? In the most interesting and outrageous case, it is something that is not human and not primate, but still hominid. How do we explain a hominid that small? So the answer is, before we get too excited and spend too much time speculating, is let's just use the techniques that we use in the laboratory every single day to answer the question. So luckily, here at Stanford, we happen to have literally the world's expert, the man who wrote the book on bone dysplasias and syndromes, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Lachman. So one of the first things that Dr. Lachman immediately remarked upon was the shape of the head and the skull.
PowerPoint quit unexpectedly. Well, I'll let them fix that because now this seems to be down. What he goes on to say is to describe the whole process of analyzing this, both from the point of view of the genetics and what Dr. Lachman found. Now the genetics. You have to understand, these scientists are not going to say this is an exobiological specimen. It's not possible. So they're going to say, and they have to say, that until proven otherwise, it's some kind of bizarre human. Now, the genetics, however, have become very difficult. Now, I want to just explain a little bit about how you do a genetic run on something like this. You take the genetic material, in this case, the bone marrow that we got from the ribs. You then isolate that genetic material. It turned out it was very rich, meaning that it did not have to go through a lot of PCR, polymerase chain reaction replication, where you can get a lot of errors. So it was a very pure, very rich DNA sample. Normally when you run, say, my sample, your sample, against the 2,500 ethnic groups that are in the genetic database of the Human Genome Project, you get a very, very, very high match. This one, they took it, purified it, ran it at the 3 top laboratories in the world, 3 separate ones, with now 50x, 50 time checking it 50 times. And there are 2 million base pairs, or 9% of the genetic material unmatched. Let me repeat that. With 50x magnification or replication, it's still 9% unmatching. Now, sometimes you'll get 3 or 4%, in a bad case 7, if it's very corrupted, but this wasn't corrupted DNA. And therefore, the issue really becomes, how do you get a 9% unmatch on a sample that was done at the top labs in the world, where you normally would not expect that? So this is the unexplained part. What's been done up to today, July 20th, or whatever it is, 2013, is a computerized run against the known human genetics. Now, the National Security Agency and Majestic may have this, but I do not have a database of ET civilization's genetics. Therefore, we don't have ET genetic material to compare it to. All we can do is run it against humans. Now, keep in mind that a mouse is 70% identical to you and me. A chimpanzee is 96% identical. Neanderthals, which of course are extinct, well, there's some people you wonder. But But they're 99.5% identical to humans. Those are Neanderthals, all right? So Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, modern humans, are 99.5% identical. If you have that much concordance between Neanderthals and us, what's the difference between a creature like this and us? Now, normally, if you have a genetic defect that leads to, say, Down syndrome, which is a trisomy. Everybody knows that. Anyway, I won't go into all the genetic syndromes. But, you know, you can map that, and it can cause all kinds of problems just from one mutation. Something like this appears not to be one mutation, and what's even more amazing, and Dr. Nolan goes on to explain this, is that the genes that control for dwarfism and for progeria, which would be advanced aging in a system where you might get something very small but it looks like it's older than it is, those genes are normal. So where he was expecting to find abnormalities are not abnormal, and there's 9% of the genetic material, which is 2 million base pairs, that were kicked out by the computer and said, we can't match this. Weird. So now the hard part starts. Why? Because you have 2 million base pairs that could theoretically represent 1,000 genes that have to be looked at one by one by one to see what they do. That's going to take years and probably millions of dollars unless we can recruit a lot of people to do it. What's really important for you to understand is that people have taken his comment saying, well, this deformed human, well, what else is he going to say? It's from Stanford. Privately, he knows that nobody knows what this is, and he will admit in his last interview, I think he did with the Huffington Post, I mean, we had like 5 million people responding to this on the Huffington Post. He will say, we don't know what it is. So when you ask me, what is this, I will tell you, I don't know, and neither do you. And if there's a quack out there telling you they do know what it is, they're not only a liar, but a damn liar, and they don't know anything about science. All right, so here's the other part of this that gets even more complex. When you look at 2 million base pairs that are unmatched, let's say half of it is junk DNA or computer error, which is unlikely, but let's just for argument's sake. That would still leave 4.5% of the genetic material of this creature not matching. That's a bigger delta, a bigger difference between that creature and us than we are from chimpanzees. You know where I'm going with this now. All right? So that's what you got to look at. The fact that it has genes that are similar to ours isn't surprising if it's an upright humanoid type life form, because a mouse has 70% identical. It's not like it's going to be an algae. So we have to begin to look at this from scratch all over again. So what we're doing, and I'm here to announce this first time publicly, that there is a very large biotech company called Ingenuity. Some of you have probably heard of it if you're in the scientific world. They're going to offer a significant prize, and we're going to put all this genetic material on the internet for hundreds, thousands of PhD geneticists and universities to look at and study so we can figure out what this is. Because at this point, no one knows. And it's beyond the resources of one lab. I mean, Dr. Nolan has 35 or 40 PhDs that work under him, but they're doing their own regular day jobs. He did this in his spare time, which is not much, and he's a very, very busy and prestigious scientist. But we now are going to have to recruit other scientists at top universities throughout the world to look at this, and there is going to be a prize offered for people who can figure out what is going on with this 2 million base pairs, and Ingenuity is going to do that for this project, which is a very big breakthrough, bridging ufology, as it were, and unknown events like this into the scientific community. So that's a really wonderful thing that's happening. The other thing that is very new about this is that we are learning that this isn't the only one. Now, when I first met Dr. Nolan, I remember going to Stanford, and we were talking. He said, you know, if there's more than one of these, it's case closed. Because there are no genetic defects like this in the literature. If there are two of them, the chances that it's a one-off mutation having randomly in other places goes down almost infinitesimally. And then when I was at the National Press Club a few weeks ago, meeting with the thing there, the hearings, I met some folks who said, well, what about this one and what about that one? And I need your help, because some people here may know of other specimens that are out there. But then we learned about these others. So here you have, it's not very good footage, very similar creature, very similar head, 4 skull bones, just like ours. It's larger. It's probably around a foot to maybe 13 inches. Not great photography. There's a whole backstory to this in Russia, how this creature was found. A woman, it was living. She found it running somewhere out, I think near a cemetery or in the woods. She captured it, brought it home, tried to feed it. It died in her house. It then got known. I remember in 1996, I was called into this case, but by the time I learned about it, the KGB, or whatever, the FSB, had confiscated it. This specimen is no more. So unfortunately, we do not have the ability to do the CAT scans and proper x-rays and genetic work on this one, but its description, how it moved, how it was seen, the size of it as probably an adult version of this type of humanoid is, at least has a record that we were able to find. And if there's this one, there are bound to be others. So in this case, when you look at the skull of this particular one from Russia and the skull of the ATACAMA humanoid, they're incredibly similar. In not only how the joints come together and how it comes to a point, but the number of skull bones itself, which you do not see in humans. So, and then we find out that in Chile, there's another one of these. This is not the one we did the genetics on. And there is another specimen. And we have found out that, in fact, it's only 3 inches big. It's even a smaller one. And this is not a hoax. We are trying to see if we can get there to do studies on this one. It also has this very unusual shaped head. We do not know about the other aspects of it, because this is obviously, if ours was a 6 to 8 year old, this one is half the size. Maybe it was a 1 or 2 year old. We don't know. But we're on the trail to this, thanks to the work of a lot of great folks, not just our team, but people who I've met recently, like ALEXIS and others. So here you have multiple pictures of that one in Chile. Now, I'll leave this for a moment. When we look at this entire effort, keep in mind that the last time that the Smithsonian or National Geographic funded an expedition so that they could get one photograph of a living giant squid in its living environment, they spent $5 million. We've done this with no funding. And one of the problems with the whole UFO and extraterrestrial research area is that it's unfunded. What we really need to be able to do is go down to the Atacama Desert with ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, archaeologists, people who understand forensics, and go to these areas, because we've also learned that there are some old mines from the 1800s that when they were digging into the earth, they chopped into a little underground city where, in other words, we have this big hall here, but if your adults are only a foot high, if you had a 2-foot high corridor, that would be us like having a 12-foot ceiling in our house. That's pretty roomy. So, and these reports persist of people seeing, under certain lit conditions, living versions of these, not only in Chile, but also in Russia, in Puerto Rico, and other places. Someone sent me a note not just before I left to come here from Washington about this Edward Snowden, the leaker from the NSA, making some comment about something he ran across about underground ultra-terrestrials. I don't know if that's true. If it is true, that's interesting. Wouldn't surprise me. The other part of the question, and this is where I'm going to go into my hypotheses and perhaps some informed speculation, if you will allow me. You want to hear my thoughts on what I think this is? All right. So the science behind this is still a work in progress and will be, I would say, for another 3 to 5 years. We need to go on an expedition and make contact with these civilizations if they are there. As you know, I founded the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative in 1990. We now have several thousand teams all over the world using remote viewing, consciousness, thought, and other protocols to make contact. Wouldn't it be cool to go to the ATACAMA Desert with the right scientific equipment, and then at night we sit out under the stars and vector in and make contact with these civilizations if they're still there? That's what I'd like to do. Because what I think is that we're dealing with something that may be the missing link. Everyone knows that Homo sapiens, there's a gap in our evolutionary path. And years ago, I was talking to a spook, a National Security Agency guy, who said, well, we think there have been about 64 augmentations of our human genetic material that has resulted in modern Homo sapiens. I said, augmentations by whom? He said, by people from other planets. And I thought, oh, well, you better not say that to Sarah Palin. But how did I say that? I apologize. Anyway, I'm the world's 6,000 years old, didn't you know? Some of the information I've gotten from classified sources is that there's nothing new under the sun. And in the middle of these discussions, I got an email from Dr. Nolan that was a study done at a major university, multiple universities, that were studying the normal evolutionary path of how DNA should have evolved on Earth given the current scientific hypotheses. Well, based on their supercomputer modeling, our DNA should have taken 10.5 billion years to get to where we are. But guess what? The Earth has only been in its orbit for 4.5 billion years. What's going on? There's some things not adding up. And I think that when the native peoples, and my grandmother was half Cherokee, and they would speak of the people from the stars, and that their people had come from the Pleiades, and that, in fact, Shenandoah, the word Shenandoah means daughter of the stars, or daughter from the stars. And you go to South America, and the native peoples speak of the star people and the star beings, and the ancient petroglyphs, and the Nazca lines, and on and on and on and on. Is it possible that contact has always happened on this planet? I would say yes. It's almost a certainty. Is it possible that this is the result of some Earth/non-Earth life form that has been around a while? Because here's something I didn't share with you a moment ago. You're going to get bored again, but just stay with me. There's something called a B2A allele. Not the B2 stealth bomber, but the B as in boy, 2A allele. And it's a marker on the female mitochondrial DNA that is found in women of this part of Chile. It's in this specimen. So the question becomes, did the women in that part of the world get that allele from them or them from the humans? But it's in there. Now again, this is something that needs to be determined further investigation, but it brings up some fascinating questions. Because are there markers within us that we will eventually find are from other places, other species? And I think the answer is going to be yes, and it's going to rock the world of science, anthropology, theology, philosophy, history. Everything's going to be upended if this ends up where I think it's going. And to which I say, fine. It's time to upset the apple cart a little, because I think we're heading in the wrong direction in too many ways. The other thing that we have discovered is that there are accounts of the type of craft seen around this area of Chile. They're sort of egg-shaped, luminous, not that large, that are trans-dimensional, not quite materialized, seen going into the Earth. It's not that they appear and then they sit there on there. They go in. And one of the people, if you look at the Disclosure Project materials, some years ago, in 1991, we had a Marine who was stationed at a secret facility on the Peruvian-Bolivian border. And if you go to SeriousDisclosure.com, you can find his testimony. Basically, what he was doing, he was guarding a facility that was allegedly an astronomy outpost, but it was actually a tracking system that was used by the Air Force and by the SDI, Star Wars, using energy weapons, directed energy weapons. And he was there one night when they locked onto an extraterrestrial vehicle, hit it with some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon. It fell and crashed right near the border of Bolivia and Peru, which is not too far from this area of Chile. And when he got there the next day, he and his sergeant were the first people on the site. It was a craft that is very similar in description, not that large, egg-shaped, like has been seen going in and out of the Earth in this area where these small life forms are found. And he felt that if this was an interstellar vehicle, it was fairly small, and he, at the time, thought, and said to me, he felt that the creatures inside would have been small. He did not see the life forms inside this craft, although it was grievously injured, and the craft itself was oozing sort of a multicolored liquid out of its shell. By the way, just so you know, actual extraterrestrial vehicles are nano-biotechnological AI. Got it? Artificial intelligence. The craft themselves have a biological component. So, too much? Too weird? All right. I mightn't started yet. And they're also conscious. So when this Marine told me this, I thought, I tucked it away in the back of my mind. And I'm beginning to connect some dots here with that event of a crash retrieval in South America. That was not a crash that was accidental. It was a crash much like Roswell and the San Antonio crash that Paula Harris will talk about tomorrow near the Trinity site. These were done using scalar Tesla-type longitudinal electromagnetic directed energy weapons, which we have had since the 20s and 30s and 40s, by the way. And one of the questions becomes, if this event, where this particular life form happened pre-technological civilization, in other words, late 1800s, we didn't have those sort of things, they may have been coming and going all the time, and there may have been a lot of contact. The other question is, if that B2A allele appeared in the last 50,000 years, if you look at the ancient archaeology dealing with possible ET contact amongst the Maya, the Incan, Mesoamerica, South America, it dates to around that time. So it may be possible that contact started many, many thousands of years ago. And that's how there has been some genetic commingling. And then finally, the most interesting and explosive, although a bit nerdy, so sorry, but you're going to get more biological stuff. So you didn't know you were going to do a PhD in biology today, but you are. There's something called epigenetics. Everybody, how many people have heard of that term? Not many. Okay. Epigenetics are the effects in the environment, in chemical systems, diet, meditation, that can turn on and off genes. You know, there was only around, some large percentage of the genetic material of the human genome was called junk DNA until the last couple of years. Now they're finding that that junk DNA, that is not a permanent gene operating all the time, is turned on and off based on environmental influences, whether you're in a meditative state, whether you're stressed, whether you have a chemical in your system, and so what is happening is that there's this whole area of epigenetics, meaning that there are things that can happen electromagnetically, consciously, thought, mental states, chemicals you're exposed to, that will turn on or off genes that are in you already. And this is the big frontier in genetics right now, is epigenetics. You can look it up. What if this life form was an epigenetic result, an involvement between Earth and some other civilization that utilized knowledge way beyond our science and genetics in 2013 that resulted in this life form? so that it's an epigenetic result. This is something we're going to seriously look at, although that area of genetic research is very early in its infancy. So those are some of my thoughts. Another thought that I have about this is that if there are more of these out there that we can put through this protocol, we now have the protocol and the team to do it. So if any of you know of a physical specimen that maybe could be located, that we could take a genetic sample from, we would want to know about that. But we have to have a full access pass. That was what took me 4 years with the group in Barcelona. We can't just say, look at it and make a guess. I mean, that's what they were doing for years, since 2003 and 2004. We want to do real science on these specimens. So that is something we now have set up. The protocols are known. We've learned a lot in the last 9 months doing this. And if any of you can help us. The other thing I'm putting out a call for are people to support an expedition to the Atacama Desert to do the archaeology, the research, to do the underground excavations, and also to do a CE5 contact with the interstellar civilizations. Because I believe that if we went down there and had a properly supported team to do it, there are amazing, from what I'm hearing, amazing contact events that could result, not to mention finding perhaps more evidence of these. There are accounts from people, now these are, again, it becomes apocryphal, of some more of these specimens in urns that are stored in a very remote place at the edge of the Andes. And there's a sort of antique village, an extinct village that exists that the people in Barcelona got very close to but ran out of time and funds to get there, where there are accounts that there may be more of these specimens. So if that is true, then it certainly warrants a full court press scientifically. And if there's anyone here who can help us with that, then please do. So what I want to do now is shift gears a little bit over the next few minutes from the ATACAMA humanoid to the whole question of disclosure in general. And many of you know that, I've been involved with this for too long, and certainly my family would say so. And it's been a very difficult road. Many people say to me, when is disclosure going to happen? And I tell them, we're doing it. Disclosure isn't going to be happening by the President of the United States. It is not going to happen from the Congress. It is unlikely to happen from the UN, although they wanted to. Because these potentates are not going to try to take on a kleptocracy of a multi-trillion-dollar complex of fossil fuel interests to bring out something that would lead immediately to the disclosure that we have technologies that would give us an energy source, 0 point, anti-gravity, and be all fossil fuels. One of the problems I've learned in dealing with people in Washington, and I know I was meeting with W's consigliere, George W. Bush's consigliere on energy and nuclear power, and we were at the University Club there up in the White House, and with some people from the State Department, and he said to me, he says, well, Dr. Greer, obviously none of this should be secret, but it is, and it's going to stay that. Don't think the President's going to do anything. First of all, he doesn't know. Cheney did. But secondly, he says everybody who becomes president rules as a conservative, whether they're conservative or liberal, from the real definition of don't change anything. And I remember this conversation I had with an admiral who is in charge of CONUS, Continental United States Security. And he said, you're absolutely right. This should never be kept secret. But this is too big for me to handle. I just want to get out of this command and retire and go fishing in Wyoming at my place. So the reality is these people put their pants on one leg at a time. The likelihood that you're going to have political figures and very wealthy people come out on something like this is not great. However, if the people keep disclosing the truth, we can do that. We have begun to load up the first tranche of 110 hours of military, corporate, and intelligent witnesses through SeriousDisclosure.com up on our website. You can see it. You can use it. We're putting it at open source. You want to make a documentary with the testimony, do it with my blessing. You've heard it here on the stage. All right? Because it is time for this to end. The secrecy has got to end, but it's unlikely it's going to end until there's a mass movement in the public. And so we have to keep that happening. We are responsible for disclosure. Now, should the leaders do it? Yes, if they were to follow their constitutional duties. But as a good friend of Bill Clinton's told me after I briefed his CIA director, he says, well, the president would love to see this happen. But they're convinced that if he does this, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. I started laughing. Now, I'm at dinner with my 4 kids around the table, and this guy, he's kind of a bag man for the Democratic Party. You know, you get cash and bring it in. And he used to stay at the White House a lot. And I thought, oh, that's a relief. He says, no, we're serious. I said, what are you telling me? He says, well, they're convinced that there are some really rogue elements that want to keep this secret that will do anything within their power to keep it from going out through official channels. I said, well, then what do you want me to do? I said, I'm just a country doctor here in North Carolina taking care of shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks and all the fun stuff. And he says, well, we think you should do it. No, this is a serious conversation. They'll go right hand to the president. I said, well, that's nice. So what you're telling me is I'm expendable. He says, yes, you're expendable. Nobody cares about you, and it doesn't matter if they kill you. So what was fascinating about this conference is to see how the politicians and lawyers think. You know, it's cover your ass and don't do anything significant. So, and don't, for God's sakes, rock the boat on the $600 trillion petro-Nazis who have all the oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, and utilities in the world, which if it came out that UFOs are real, you know, there's this mantra, UFOs are real. Yeah, and you think they're getting here using Exxon Jet A fuel? No. And do we know how they operate? Yes. The third highest ranking scientist at the Naval Research Labs is a man I've known for many, many years. He stayed at my home. He's been on every committee. He would be the foremost aerospace engineer designer in the world if it wasn't for the fact everything he's built is black and unclassified. So this man told me that years ago he was in, quote, the vault and saw the documents establishing that Majestic was a real entity and still has a component, MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C, if you see that on a document. And number 2, that in October of 1954, we mastered gravity control. So we began to be able to build under reliable conditions some of the things that Adolf Hitler was experimenting with electromagnetic gravitic devices. So Lockheed Martin, my uncle, as many of you know, my uncle was the senior project engineer, designed the lunar module that went to the moon. Northrop Grumman, SAIC, MITRE Corporation, all of these have had an involvement over the last years, decades, developing these technologies. And we have them. So when you go out there, those of you who are MUFON field investigators, the first thing you have to learn before you ever run down a case again is to learn what it is that we have in our arsenal that's human. Because if you don't know what Lockheed Martin Skunk Works has, there's no way you're going to distinguish that from an extraterrestrial vehicle. And believe me, they can be very similar because over 60 years of research and development, and as you'll see tonight in the movie, when Donald Rumsfeld said there's $2.3 trillion unaccounted for, 2.3 trillion. He did not misspeak. He did not mean to say billion. No one cares about $1 billion at the Pentagon. A billion here and a billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. But $2.3 trillion is completely unaccounted for. This by the admission of W's Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. And we have the videotape of it, and you'll see it. Now, when you think about this, you have to ask the question, where's it been going? Well, it's been going to SAIC and MITRE and Booz Allen Hamilton and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and EG&G and Pahut Mesa out here. Nobody calls it Area 51, by the way. You want to talk about Pahut Mesa, S4, S12, S3, and Groom Lake, all that. So the big action now is at Dugway up in Utah. Restricted airspace, no roads to it. You cannot get in there, and it's classified airspace over it. And also in Australia. So what you're beginning to put a picture here of a government that is separate from the government of we the people. Now, the irony is that my farm in Virginia is just down the road from Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. And when we were first planning the whole disclosure movement, I was sitting there with these big pieces of paper storyboarding, you know, the next decade or two and what needed to happen. And I swear I heard Thomas Jefferson in my right ear go, "The next American Revolution. It's time." We need a renewal of our country and of this planet. So we have to disclose this information, but in a way that doesn't hurt us, but in a way that propels us into a peaceful future. That's going to be the hardest part, because ultimately, if disclosure happens within the construct of what Wernher von Braun warned us about when he said that they would try to create a false flag, hoax a situation of an attack on the planet so that they could expand the military-industrial sector into space. You know what? It's actually already happened. That's what Hollywood is doing with the $2 billion in alien invasion films. That's why this is all being orchestrated by people who want you to think we have someone new to fight. So what they want you to do, they want you to trade racism and religious strife and misogyny and homophobia and Catholics killing Protestants and Shias killing Sunnis and Buddhists killing Muslims and whatever it is that you want to think of, with humans at war with something out there. This is not, my friends, progress. What we have to do is realize the time that we're entering, the only way it can be survived is that if we adopt a paradigm of universality, and that is the universality of consciousness and mind and spirit, and that there's really one people in the cosmos, and we are that people, if you go past the superficial differences. And that is the deepest part of what I want to share with you, is that if we can reach into ourselves and discover that, we will be able to create a world that can go on for millions of years. If we don't, we're in real trouble, because there's no way that we're going to be able to go into space using weapons that are much more destructive than thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, doing the kinds of things we're doing covertly, where we target ET craft and they get downed, and get away with it indefinitely. So we're going to have to come together as a people and decide we're going to choose something here. And here's our choice: war or peace, destruction or life, the future or the past of division. And this is really the big challenge of our generation. And I hope that we can come together as a people and make the right choice this time, because we've made some very poor choices in the last 100 years or so. Ultimately, this thing gets about humans. I always tell people the secrecy is more about the human condition, and disclosure is much more about the human condition. The least significant aspect of all of this is the extraterrestrial part. They're waiting for us to grow up and become what Michikachu calls a level 1 civilization, where we're living peacefully and not destroying our biosphere and each other. We need to attain that level 1 civilization quickly. Now, some people say, oh, it'll never happen. I'm going to say, yeah, it will, because it has to. Something about humans, we survive. And we are now in an existential crisis, where if we don't make the correct decisions and bring out free energy and end the destruction of the biosphere and make peaceful contact with these civilizations and stop the madness of the endless wars around the world, we do not have a future. And I think out of compassion, we also have to understand that we're in this lovely ballroom here in Las Vegas, where it's 110 outside and 78 degrees in here, whatever it is. But you know that half the world's population doesn't even have plumbing? Why? When Nikola Tesla and others came out with free energy devices 100 years ago. When near my home in Virginia, Dr. Walter Russell was teaching and mentoring Nikola Tesla about the Universal One at Swannanoa, that I can see from my house up on the Blue Ridge Mountains. Why are we still living this way? It is because the good people have not chosen to do the right thing. And the people who are trying to maintain their grip on power and greed have done things that we have allowed them to do. Ultimately, this means that when you look at our political system, I don't say you give up on it, but you don't put all your eggs in that basket, which is why many people have misunderstood what I've done with disclosure. The disclosure movement worldwide is happening everywhere. There are 14 countries that are opening up files. There are now open public offices in different governments and military institutions, as you heard about Japan and France, looking into the subject in a credible way. Many of the changes that are happening are going to have to pick up pace. But the biggest thing that's happening, the most exciting thing that's happening, is why I got involved with this subject to begin with. And I know many of you may know a little bit of this story. But when I was 17, I died. I had a near-death experience. And in that experience, I had an experience of what some people would call sort of samadhi, a universal, beautiful experience. Now, you have to understand, I was raised a very devout atheist. It didn't fit in a test tube, didn't exist, end of discussion. And so I was like, I didn't have a predilection to believe in any of the, angry old men with beards throwing lightning bolts at you from up on high in the pearly gates, or whatever. I didn't have any concept of that. My family didn't buy into that. But this experience was profound, and I had a beautiful near-death experience. 6 months later, I was up in the Blue Ridge Mountains on a mountain because I wanted to learn how to meditate, to experience that state of one mind that you experience in pure consciousness that I had when I was 17 and a half and had this near-death experience. And so here I am, 18 years old, and I'm sitting on this mountain, and I go into this meditation, and I have this experience. It was just like when I had the near-death experience. It was unbounded mind, and then I found myself in space. I was just free. I was remote viewing. I was omnipresent. It was magnificently beautiful. And just before I started that meditation, there was a silver disc that appeared, materialized and dematerialized over in the southwest. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. They're back, because I had had a contact experience when I was 8 or 9. And I didn't think anything more about it, actually. And at the end of the meditation, I had this experience where I looked up at the stars. You know how when you're really clear, you can see the whole Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. And a thought, not my own somehow, said, behold what a beautiful universe God has made. And with that, I went right into this state, while my eyes were open, that I was in the near-death experience. And I began to become aware that there was some little creature. Now, I mean, I'm an 18-year-old kid. I thought it was like a deer had almond-shaped eyes, but it wasn't a deer. It came over and touched me on my right shoulder, and there was an electromagnetic field around me, and all my hair stood on end. And I used to have a lot of hair then, longer hair. This is, 1973, dude. So at that point, time stopped. Everything stopped. And I found myself with them in space, with translucent energy around me that represented a craft, but we were in a meditative state. It was then that I created something that I want to share now. And it's called the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Protocols, where you learn to go into meditation, remote view, send your mind out in a coherent thought, like this is a coherent laser light, and contact these civilizations within the paradigm of universal peace. That is what I experienced that night when I was 18. And it wasn't until 1990, many, many, many years later, that I decided to form an organization dedicated to that. And what we have now, and by the way, if you're interested in this, you can come on an expedition with us, but you can also get an app. We have a contact app that teaches the meditation, the remote viewing course, turns your phone into a magnetic field meter, so when a craft is approaching, it goes off and signals you. All of this. One of the things I was talking to Jan Harzan about last night is that wouldn't it be cool if the MUFON investigators who are collecting sightings hooked up with the 10,000 CSETI people who are doing these contact protocols, so that when there's a report, they go out as a rapid response team to do these other protocols to see if they can continue the contact happening. That'd be kind of cool. I don't know what kind of app interface you'd have to do for that, but if there's a programming genius in the audience, talk to me later. Because I think what we have to do is say, look, the State Department doesn't have a unit making contact with these civilizations. The United Nations does not, because I know I've met with the senior UN Secretary General level folks there for years. The Senate doesn't. The Congress doesn't. Certainly Whitehall doesn't in England. What country is showing a face of humanity except us, the people? Instead, they're getting a military response. They're getting secrecy. They're getting covert programs. What I would say, rather than railing against all that darkness, let's introduce some light. And let's just do this ourselves. Because I think this is the time for we the people to do disclosure, for we the people to make contact, and for we the people to say it's time for us to come together and bring out these science and technologies. And to hell with the attempt to keep them secret. You know, you will see in the series, yeah, we have to do it. Two and a half years ago, the Federation of American Scientists, a very mainstream scientific group, released a document where they stated there were 5,135 patents that have been confiscated under the National Security Act. That doesn't count people like the scientists I've worked with who have invented these zero-point and free energy devices that have just had people knock on their door who never even went to the patent process. Those thousands more. So you have a Gestapo-deep national security state that is criminal and illegal. Believe me when I tell you, members of the Senate, even Intelligence Committee, do not know about those projects. The President of the United States does not know about them. The head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, whom I briefed personally, had no knowledge of it, and nor did the CIA director I briefed or the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. A priori and forever, those operations are criminal, and we cannot be bound by them anymore. So what I'm also saying is that what we're doing with the proceeds from Sirius is to get the word out, is to create a new energy lab. And I remember years ago, Ted Koppel of Nightline talking to me private, what would happen if you had one of these and they came with you with a national security order? I said, I will tear it up in front of millions of people, and believe me, they'll be watching. It's time for us to say no more, no mas to this, secrecy. And I think that it's not going to happen by people looking at YouTube. We've got to actually have our own people go out there, get the resources in place, and create the laboratory. The good news is that between 2001 and now, I've identified dozens of scientists who understand this, physics, and also have documents and patents, we'll say how I got them, that had been previously seized under the National Security Act that need to be put out there and built up. Now, I can't do anything with them. My wife has to hook up the DVD player. I'm good with a defibrillator, but don't give me a computer. Forget about it. Ain't going to happen. But we need to put the best physicists, theoreticians, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, systems people, and materials management, because you get into really specialized materials. One of the people I know who was at Lawrence Berkeley Labs years ago was using barium titanate, putting a signal in at thousands of volts at a certain resonant frequency, and he was getting 10 to 50 times more power out than in because of the crystalline structure of that barium titanate. CIA doesn't like me to tell you about barium titanate, but I'm telling you. So the point is, you know, this is a doable thing, but you're not going to do it in your garage. You're not going to do it with a couple $100,000. The equipment you have to do this laboratory is about $450,000 to do it properly, and that's a small lab. So what we want to do is do this in a way, however, where we would have it Ustreamed. So we're in there working, and there's no patent. We're not going to, it's open source it. And if they want to come and seize it then, the whole world will be watching, and watch out. Because I think the people power will work if we organize. And the only bad thing about nice people, like all of you in this room, is that you're nice. And these devils aren't nice. They don't mind killing and imprisoning people, torturing people. What are we going to do to stand up to them? If good people do nothing, what do we get? We get the Third Reich. Now we're heading into the Fourth Reich. I think it's time for the people to stand up and say, we're going to create a new world. And this is our time to do it. Now I'm going to just share a couple of things that are immensely controversial. Jan Harzan, forgive me. Can you kill this spotlight on the screen? I don't know why you'd put a spotlight on the screen again. Can you turn it? You don't want to have your screen illuminated with a light. Hello? Thank you. Okay. And the lights backstage need to go off. It looks like a hanger in there. Now, everybody know what Joshua Tree National Park is? I had an expedition, CE5 contact expedition there a few years ago, not that long ago. And we went out there, and how many people have seen orbs floating in their house or in their yards or out around you? Everybody had an orb experience? Okay, those are trans-dimensional interstellars. Let me explain what that is. It's when an entire spacecraft or group of beings can be folded within space-time. The only effect you're going to see in this dimension is either an electromagnetic discharge through a magnetometer or some other instrument or some sort of a light. There was a basketball or smaller size orb that appeared beside me when we were out in the desert with about 30 or 40 people. And it appeared and then disappeared. And when it reappeared, it lit up in a cone of light the chairs. These are chairs sitting in the desert. And when we looked at the photograph, there was like a holographic being. This is a head. It's very almost Caucasian, flesh-colored. Looks like a yarmulke here. You see it? That's actually a teleportation device. It's trans-dimensional. This being is about 5 feet tall. He's from the Andromeda galaxy, he told us. This is one leg. The other one's kicked behind him. It's almost an energy field. And people say, oh, these are like an angelic's wings. I said, no, it's just the energy field it was in. He was being projected out of this orb, and using a 3 to 4 second exposure, we got this, and this is his chest, his arm, his other hand is here. If you look at it on a computer screen, high definition, it's quite amazing. This is what's happening all around us when we're making contact. Some of them have fully materialized flesh. Some have been crafted to fully materialize. Often it's this sort of thing. Suddenly our magnetometers, our radar detectors will be in the middle of nowhere. They'll go beep, 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 everything go, and there's nothing there. I'll say, take a picture over there, because you'll see a field disturbance, like the heat in the desert, but it's at 2 in the morning. And here's who's standing right outside our circle. This is his nose, his eyes. It's lit up from this side. The light's coming from here, hitting this side of his head. So this is what, at the CIA, they call WSFM. You know what that is? Stands for Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. That is what they call this. So after the citizens hearing thing, I went out to a party with all these spooks and scientists from the CIA and NSA, and they said, oh yeah, all this weird stuff, that's so cool. Anyway, so this is what's really happening. Every one of you can learn to do this. And I would say do this at home. Do it with your friends. Learn the contact protocols, and you'll be amazed at who will show up. This is just a measurement of the distances. I won't bore you with it, but this is the actual being. Now, it's not fully, those of you who live in just 3D, get over it. If you go from one star system to another, by definition, you're dropping out of linear space-time, folding into another dimension that's increasingly in the realm of consciousness and thought, and reappearing at another point in space and time. The mystery to all of this is the quantum conscious hologram known as reality. This is at my ranch in Colorado. I have some land there near the Buddhist stupa that the Dalai Lama asked Ambassador Jim George of Canada, who was a great supporter of our work. And there was an object that was right in front of us, and this is in one frame of a camera. Zoop! And it's this kind of light ship. Beautiful. This happened last year or year before last in Colorado. And then you have something like this. If you dim the lights, you'll be able to see it better. And we're at Mount Shasta.
Oh my God.
That was great.
There's a ship, lift up right from in the field in front of us, this light ship. Came up out of Mount Shasta. And the camera guy is awesome, Todd Goldenbaum, did our app. He's a real genius with software. Here it is. Like a worm, like it's folding in and out of this dimension. It goes out into space. Now, we were doing these protocols when this appeared. Watch it come up again. This is not a firefly. Right at the edge of the speed of light, in and out of this dimension. How many people have seen something like this? I'm sure a number of you have. So what our intention is to set up a global network, which we now have built. And 20 years ago, it was a dream to do close encounters of the fifth kind, which is when you would deliberately make contact and invite them to come. Now we have thousands of people. I was there when this happened, and it's magnificent when it happens. It's so beautiful. Why? And why are they responding? People say, why are they coming to your groups? I said, nothing special about us, certainly nothing special about me. What's special is that they're waiting for someone to do something halfway intelligent and peaceful, instead of chasing them with F-16s and shooting at them with electromagnetic pulse weapons. We can do better than this. And here's something that happened the last year. Watch this. Bing! Right within 20 feet of us. So awesome. This thing appeared. How many people have seen something like this when you've been out and had contact? It's awesome. There's nothing there. So where did it come from? Well, it was there all along, but it was in another dimension, and then it blipped into this one. We all saw this, by the way. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs and videos like this. People go, really? I say, yeah. Not that anyone wants to hear. Everyone wants to kick the tires on a UFO. I say, well, go to Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. That's where those are. This is the ET stuff. Transdimensional Interstellar, TDIS. And that's what we need to master, is the difference between covert anti-gravity devices and ET contact that is increasingly in the realm of other dimensions, thought, consciousness, unusual radiation, unusual light, and sometimes fully in this dimension. That's the least likely way it happens, but it does. It absolutely does, and many of you have had that kind of contact, as have I. The key thing to understand is that we can facilitate this happening. We don't have to be passively looking and watching all this happen after the fact. So real-time research is when you actually go out there when it's happening. And it's beautiful. Instead of looking at Jay Leno and eating Cheetos, get off your couches and go out under the stars and meditate together and make contact. And you know what? If you build it, they'll come. They're waiting for you. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that we're standing on the precipice of an enormous change in human civilization. The disclosure that we're not alone in the universe is a very big deal. But making direct contact because they're here waiting for us is a bigger one. And it isn't going to happen by letting other people determine our future. We have to create our future. And here's the future I think that we all have to see, and that has to guide the world. That we become an enlightened civilization that goes into space peacefully. That we learn that within every single human being, but also every single sentient life form, is the spark of the awake mind that is non-local, universal consciousness. And it is omnipresent. It is true that every point in space and time is connected to every other point in space and time by mind, thought, consciousness. There's no barrier. And if we begin to realize that, we can manifest the world of our dreams. And it's not just a pipe dream, it's the dream that's trying to come through us, this world, this generation, where we become a civilization going into space peacefully, but also living on the earth with free energy, where I can go to Australia in 5 or 10 minutes instead of 16 hours. And we're at the point where this can happen, but it can only happen if we decide we're going to live together in peace, not just with each other, but with these other civilizations. And that is the great challenge of our time. And I hope you'll join us in creating this world of peace. God bless you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Greer. That concludes now this string of lectures. About an hour and 15 minutes. Obviously, we're a few minutes early, so you get a little bit more than that. But try and be back here in about an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll continue on with our final presentation for the day. Obviously, not everything is ending after that presentation, but that will be our final presentation. So please enjoy your dinner and come on back here in about an hour and 15 minutes.